As a quick demonstration of how central tendency can be misleading if it's not used appropriately, I want to take a look at some real data that is collected by the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States. So the CDC collects a whole lot of data, and a lot of this they make publicly available. Here I've analyzed some publicly available data from the CDC, the adolescent health, school behavior, and risk data. So this is the data from 2015, a representative sample of kids aged between 12 and 18. Now, I've selected as a subset, because it's a very large data set, 16-year-olds, you can see. And I've run some analyses using a program called SPSS to take a look at this data. Now, if we look immediately, now the data is coded, so what that means is numbers have descriptors that go with them. So a 1 means someone never had sex, a 2 means one person, 3, 2 people, and so on. So if we look at the descriptive statistics here, we see that the average, the mean, is 2. So here we would say that the average 16-year-old person in the United States has been sexually active with one person. Now, we have to think about this number, though. Number one, we notice the variability is pretty high, so all students aren't around the average. The next thing we need to think about is the range and the other measures of central tendency. So you see that there are students who aren't sexually active, and there are students at 16 reporting that they have 6 or more sexual partners. We also see that the median, the score at the 50th percentile, is a 1, meaning that they've never had a sexual partner, and the mode is a 1. So what this tells us is most 16-year-olds in the United States have not had a sexual partner, according to this sample. So if we actually take a look at the numbers, we can get a better idea of how these values are doing in describing our sample. You see that we have very nearly 3,600 16-year-old students in this data set. Now, some of them may not have replied to the question, so 463 didn't reply, so we would have had over 4,000, but we have almost 3,600 that we have data on. You see that of this almost 3,600, over 2,000 report never having had sex, and this is 57% of the 3,570 students. So 57% of these 16-year-olds who respond are not sexually active, and that would leave, of course, a total of about 43% that are sexually active. We see of those 43%, only 19% report one partner, and so we see that there's only about 24% of students who report more than one sexual partner at the age of 16. So in this case, it might not be reasonable to just say the average is to have a sexual partner, because that sounds misleading. People often think of average as meaning typical, like the typical 16-year-old has a sexual partner. But that's not what average means. Average is adding together all the scores and dividing by the count of scores. So it does not mean the most common score. That, in fact, is the mode. So from the sense of what is a typical 16-year-old, a typical 16-year-old from this data, we would say, is not sexually active. So this gives us a new way to think about how it's important when we're interpreting descriptive statistics. You have to understand what they measure and interpret them appropriately. Statistics can be very misleading when used inappropriately, even at a simple level, just talking about descriptives, central tendencies, and dispersions. So hopefully that helps you get a picture of how data can be used appropriately or in misleading ways.